In the last TT episode, we installed a Splitter Gang front splitter and their prototype spoiler extension. The splitter is awesome and from a great company, but in my opinion, the coolest thing about Splitter Gang is the fact that they make custom parts. They sent me a prototype rear spoiler extension to test on my car and redesign. Today we're gonna make this better. Now, considering this is a prototype without testing, it's pretty great, but I think with a few tweaks, we can absolutely improve it. I want to take inspiration from their prototype, as well as the OEM styling to make something that feels at home on this car. Even though I'm an engineer, I'm gonna show design steps that anybody could follow with any level of experience, and it'll apply to any car too. One cool thing about Splitter Gang is you could make a model and ship it into them, and they'll make that, meaning anyone can do this without being trained in design. And I always think more people should give design a try.
So let's talk about how we're going to design this. I want this to be applicable to everyone, and I don't want you to have to know CAD software or specific design principles to think you could do this. You can really make this out of whatever you'd like. If you don't want to spend money, I suggest something like cardboard because you're probably going to have it laying around. I, however, am making a video and I want it to have enough contrast so you guys can see what I'm doing, so I'm going to go buy some poster board. Really though, it's about being creative and using what you have around you. Well, let's go get some.
So now that we have all the supplies, here comes the fun part, design. I've had this prototype on the car for a few weeks now, so I've had a good chance to look at how it fits and think about what I want to do to make it fit better. To make something look like an extension of an OEM part, you need to follow what's already there. I really like the overall look of this spoiler extension with the divot, but the overall fitment is where it could be improved. I want the new design to continue the lines set forth by the OEM spoiler rather than changing them. I think if we manage to attach it in a way that it continues what's already there rather than changing it, it's gonna look a lot better and we can keep the styling that it tries to go for. This is what I call the brainstorming phase. Write down, draw, or think up as many options as you possibly can, with no real limits. You'll come up with a number of ideas, leading me to the next stage, narrowing down which ones are actually possible. If you're working with a company to manufacture this, you need to make sure it's something they can actually build. Different materials that they make things out of will affect this. You can also eliminate designs based on their complexity and how well they vibe with the car. This car has a simple look, so I want a simple design. After a while, I got it down to one idea. Now all we have to do is mock it up. In my mind, you can't tell if a design is good until you see a prototype of it where it's going to be living, especially if you're doing something like this where it's a body panel that you're going to look at. I plan on making this model a couple of times, and that's intentional because I know the design is going to change once I get it on the car and see what I think would look better. That brings me to the design itself. It's actually a two-piece design. There's a support piece connecting to the bottom of the spoiler, and then a show piece which actually goes on top of the support piece. What you see me mocking up right now is the support piece. You'll see why I went with the two-piece design in a second. I had quite a few goals when designing this piece, but I think there are a few that stand out as being really important if you're trying to design something that flows with the look of your car. First and foremost is use what's already there. And specifically what I mean by that is use the lines that define what the car looks like. Cars have body lines, and some cars have really distinct ones, the TT included. And the best way to make something you're attaching to a car look intentional is by continuing those lines rather than abruptly changing them. Same thing with angles and curves. This support piece is going to allow our show piece to sit at the same angle as the spoiler, which is going to make it look a lot more intentional and flow better with the overall design. Expanding on my line continuation theory, I also don't want the support piece to be as wide as the attached piece up top. This brings me to my next design tenet, viewing angles. The prototype looked really good from a 3/4 view and from right behind. If you looked at the car from the side, however, you could see it stuck out a lot further than the OEM spoiler, giving it kind of a strange look. I want this design to look good from all angles, and if we bring the sides of this support piece in a little bit, it gives the show piece a very cool floating effect, which you'll see once we get it on. It also allows the design to look really good from every angle you view the car from. In short, I think a design should look good from every angle, not just a few. We talked about following lines, so now I want to talk about following curves. There's a lot of round cars out there. The TT is definitely one of them. You may not notice this until it's explicitly stated, but the curves are kind of what makes the car what it is. The prototype happened to curve in at a different rate than the OEM spoiler curved, so it looked like it was sticking out and there was a lump. I want the show piece to follow the exact curve that the OEM spoiler has. This is going to make it look a lot more intentional. What you see me doing right here is making a mold by hand which extends the spoiler and fits flush. I also think the thickness of the show piece needs to be at least doubled so it's roughly as thick as the top of the spoiler. Since the spoiler's thick, if we reduce the thickness for the extension, it would look a little off-putting. This brings me to the next design principle I had. I wanted to incorporate what made the Splitter Gang prototype so unique. In my opinion, it was that really cool divot they had in the middle. I hadn't seen that on a TT spoiler before, and I think it'd be really cool if we could preserve that. What you see me doing here is naturally blending the OEM spoiler angle into the curve from that Splitter Gang divot. I spent a lot of time drawing this by hand so it looks smooth and natural, like a continuation of the angle that kind of flows into what their design was. And that kind of leads me into one of my final design pillars. I want this to be unique. If you're going to design something that is custom, it really makes no sense to directly copy a design that's already out there. I'm not trying to make an OEM spoiler extension. I'm trying to make something new that complements the OEM spoiler. And this first prototype is really just a proof of concept to see if I'm on the right track. I also took this time to measure the difference in angle between the bottom of the spoiler and the top of the spoiler. We're going to need this for the support piece. I used the protractor we bought earlier to measure the angle, which came out to about 20 degrees. Earlier, I made a really rough draft of the support piece for a proof of concept. Now I want to improve it. After getting foam board in the right shape, I cut a straight line across it to act as our pivot point. The way foam board works, if you just cut through half of it, it has this really cool pivot effect, which makes it great for mocking up stuff like this. Oh, and side note, if you're wondering how I'm getting all of this symmetrical, I'm using these half models to make sure it's equal side to side. Splitter Gang also knows it's being made by hand, so they'll be able to smooth it out when they actually manufacture it. Now that my support piece fits well and has the hinge in the right spot, we need to keep that hinge at a fixed angle, i.e. the 20 degrees we measured from earlier. To do that, I cut out a bunch of 20-degree supports. These aren't intended to be manufactured or anything, these are literally just there to hold it in place for the model. If your design has any sort of a fixed angle in it, I highly suggest you use this method to mock it up in the model. It worked like a charm. With the supports in place, we could tape our model up to the car and see if we like what it's looking like so far. Remember, this isn't even the final prototype. This is just a proof of concept. Honestly, for our first prototype, I think we could have done a lot worse. I put a lot of time into designing it so that it follows the lines set forth by the car. I think for the final product, if we really just polish that up a little bit more, we'll be golden. It's the next day, and the goal for today is going to be to flush out our initial prototype. So I'm going to remake it and make the lines better, the cuts better, and we're going to change the construction up a little bit and polish up the lines just so we have a good-looking prototype and one that I think flows well with the lines. Let's start by remaking our show piece to be even better. Rather than using the thick foam board, I'm switching to 2 layers of the thin foam board so that I can make it in one piece rather than 2 halves. On top of that, I'm going to be changing up some angles and curves so it fits the car better. I think when I'm done with these changes, it's going to be a seriously solid design. As I'm doubling the layers, I'm going to use electrical tape to tie them together. It's also going to help with durability when we ship it.
Pretty good.
The support piece we made yesterday is actually good enough to be the final model. I softened a few of the edges and then I gave it the same electrical tape treatment as I did the showpiece. I used painter's tape to denote the supports that aren't meant to be part of the final product as well. Overall, it holds the angle and looks good. We were dealing with quite a bit of rain today, so once it finally cleared for a little bit, I was able to throw it on the car and get a look at what the design finally looked like. I'm just using tape to hold it in place now, but you can get the idea. I think it's definitely an improvement. I honestly am pretty happy with how this looks compared to the original prototype. It keeps the prototype's identity, but flows with the lines of the car. Speaking of lines, I was very intentional. My goal was to continue every line, angle, and curve that the stock car had, and blend it into the styling of the prototype. And I think we honestly did a pretty good job. And I mean it when I say we did a good job. I took a lot of suggestions from the last video, and I reached out to a handful of you guys during the design process when I had the different versions, got your feedback, and everyone I've talked to seems to really enjoy it. If you want to be a part of that design critique for the side skirts in the next episode, reach out to me on Instagram. That's the way I've been communicating, and I think it's going to be a big, fun process. All we have to do is send it out, and I'll keep you guys posted. If you want to see what it looks like all said and done, come back to the channel here in a few weeks. I boxed our model up, and we were officially good to go. I'll get this sent off and keep you guys updated. As for what's next, we gotta do the same thing with side skirts for the car. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, learned something, or want to see more, consider dropping a like and subscribing. It really does help me and my content out. Either way, I've got loads in store for the channel. Thank you again for all of the support. Have a wonderful day.